Before the start of the 11th game, Magnus Carlsen was leading by a point, and that meant that the challenger, Vishwanathan Anand, had just 2 games remaining in order to hit back. Carlsen today had the white pieces, and once again the players tested the so-called Berlin Wall endgame. So we joined the game after 23 moves, and a very typical Berlin position is on the wall. White seems to have made progress. These knights have found their way to seemingly very nice squares, but in fact they're quite inflexible. It's hard for them to go anywhere. They protect each other. It's really hard for White to come up with a decent plan here. I suppose you could say the same with Black. Black could simply wait here with either bishop e7 or bishop g7. It's very hard for either player to go forward. But here Anand came up with a very creative idea. He played b5. It seemed as though the queen side was completely locked. But this is an amazing move. If, for example, c takes b5, then Black plays c6 and then opens up the b file, and you can see that Black just needs to put a rook here to pressurise the pawn on b3. There's also pressure on the knight on d5, and those knights actually are somehow very inflexible. Black has excellent compensation there, and that knight is always ready to hop in on one of these squares. Very good compensation. Alternatively, what about a takes b4? Well, in this case, Black breaks open the a file, and there's pressure on that pawn on c4. Also chances to invade on a2. Once again, good compensation. White has to take care of his king in this kind of situation, actually. Position can often break open to Black's advantage. So Carlsen, after, about 8.5 minutes thought, played bishop to c3. Good idea, just putting a little bit of pressure on the a pawn. But Anand carried on and played king c6. Now he certainly has the initiative here. The king puts more pressure on the knight, but also he prepares to play a rook to this open b file. King f3 from Carlsen. Now he wants to put the king on e4 to support the knight on e4, but also, as I said, the king is sometimes in a little bit of danger, even on g3. And Anand played the rook to the b file, so he continues his plan, seems very reasonable, and king e4. And now this is an extraordinary moment in the game. Anand said afterwards that he was considering rook b3. Seems like the most natural move on the board. And then, for example, rook b1. Now rooks would be traded. He'd analysed all this. He thought bishop a5 and now rook here. And, in this position they've traded a lot of pawns, but Black is still rather active. Perhaps with best play this should be a draw, and Anand assessed this position actually as just kind of equal. He could have played it. And remember, if he'd drawn this game, then he would go into the last game with the white pieces. And I think before the start of the game, he probably would have been content with that. But he said, he just saw this plan of sacrificing the exchange and just went for it. He couldn't explain his decision after the game, actually. At first glance, this exchange sack looks interesting. Black has a protected passed pawn, maybe chances to attack a4. The bishop can come to this active square on c5, and this is interesting. But Carlsen very quickly put his finger on what's wrong with Black's position here. He realised that it was this bishop that is really holding Black's position together, and he devised a plan to disturb that bishop. He played knight h5. It's a very good move. And here's the plan. Anand played king b7, perhaps with the idea of c6. f4. So with the threat of f5, pawns are exchanged, and now you can see that that knight, which actually seemed like it was doing a lot on f6 but actually wasn't, has been redeployed via h5 to f4, attacking that bishop on e6. And once that's exchanged off, then black's position looks really shaky. And you can see that now white's space advantage is really telling. Anand really has nothing better than to take that pawn. And then came rook d7. Now the plan is to play rook c1, hit the bishop and hit the pawn on c7. If, for example, king c6, this doesn't really help, because after rook d4, hitting the bishop moves away, and now check. And this is even worse. Suddenly you can see that white's rooks are really active and hitting c7. So Anand came up with rook a6 to activate the rook. Knight d5, excellent move, putting more pressure here, but also breaking the communication here, so white is ready to take. And if bishop takes knight, well, exchanging off that bishop pair is already an achievement, and the rook can take on f7, and suddenly the e-pawn is looking really dangerous, more dangerous than this guy. And also, sometimes the king can just come back to stop that b-pawn. Must be winning for white. So Anand tried rook c6 to defend the pawn on c7. Carlsen just took, hitting the bishop, and now, as before, that e-pawn looks really dangerous. So the bishop came out. And now, excellent simplification from Carlsen. After the game he said, he was playing very quickly here, and he said he had to stop himself from playing too quickly. He was so excited. But, well, after just 3 minutes thought, he took on c7. As I said, excellent simplification. This was exchanged off, and now if king takes, then rook c1, hitting lots of pieces, and white recovers a bishop, and again, excellent simplification. So king c6, tricky move. What Anand is hoping for is, if the knight moves, then maybe bishop d5 check and the pawn rolls. But once again, very quickly played by Carlsen. Excellent move, threatening to bring the knight back to d4. So back into play, and then push the e-pawn. Anand really had nothing better than to exchange this off. But again, this is a simplification, and this really eases white's task. He pushed the pawn. Carlsen pushed the pawn. Anand pushed his pawn. So there's a race taking place, but the difference between the two sides is that the rook is stronger than the bishop, and the king is able to come back to stop black's pawns, and the black king is way too far from the pawns on the king's side. So let's see how this works in practice. King d3. Let's take a bit of colour off the board. So the king comes back, threatening e7. The bishop blocks. h4. So now the simple threat is to push the g-pawn, and the bishop can't deal with both pawns. And as I said, the king is too far away. So Anand kept pushing his pawns. Carlsen pushed his pawns. a3, and now king c3. And that was the last move of the game. Here Anand resigned. First of all, we should say that if bishop b4 check, this doesn't help matters, because the e-pawn now goes through. If b2, then the king drops back. That prevents bishop b4 check. If, say, king c5, g6, threatening g7. If the bishop plays here, threatening a2, then the king just blocks those pawns. So the white king takes care of the black pawns, and now white wins. e7, threatening queen. This is taken, so this is all forced. g7, and now the king is too far away to stop the g-pawn queening. Well, I mean, that was a nerve-wracking game. I mean, out of the opening, I thought Magnus really didn't play very well, and Anand seized the initiative, but then he just lost control. Nerves got to him, and this exchange sack was a mistake. After the game, Anand said, "I can't say why I suddenly decided to go for the exchange sack. It was a bad gamble, and I was punished. I took a nervous decision." And afterwards, Magnus Carlsen admitted that he really hadn't shown his best form in this match, as well as Anand playing better than last year. But maybe the big difference between the two players was that in the critical moments of this match, Carlsen really had stronger nerves. So, Magnus Carlsen retains his world crown, and he now has 2 years before he has to defend the title again. Let's give the last word to Magnus Carlsen. He said afterwards, "I am happy and relieved." Thanks very much for watching these World Championship reports. If you liked them, then do check out my other videos on my Power Play Chess YouTube channel. It's free to subscribe. Thanks very much for watching.